Salam alaikum, alaikum salam, con las buenas noches. Tonight we're reading here from the book Palo Mayombe, The Garden of Blood and Bones. We're going to start with the visible and invisible history. And I'm not going to read too much, I'm only going to read a little bit. Here we go, and it states, history is commonly viewed as the gathering of events which occur across a horizontal line of time with a beginning and an end. But for the African mind, history is solely the repetition of timeless principles. Material history is followed as a bright shadow by the invisible powers that shape history. Therefore, taking a purely materialist view of history when discussing the African culture will not produce a history which is truthful to the mindset and worldview of the participants of those particular events. Africans, as in all traditional cultures, tend to see history in the form of a circle and a cross. In other words, history is a repetition of eternal themes that occur in similar forms on a continuum of infinity. In this continuum, the visible and invisible are at all times meeting and interacting, producing an alteration in the eternal continuum of repetition. This means that there is no act on earth that does not involve the invisible powers, and there is no act happening now that is void of precedents in the past. The history of Palo Mayombe starts with the presence and idea of Kalunga, the ocean, the means for the Middle Passage. For the inhabitants of the Central African coastline, the Kalunga was the passage to the kingdom of death and ancestry. The Kalunga was both a metaphor of death and the fluid eminence of death itself. The slave trade must also be viewed from this perspective as the ebb and flow of Kalunga. At times, the ocean was still yet soothing, at other times raging and violent. It was mystery and also a source for abundance, symbolized by the fish. Humans were seen as not much different than the inhabitants of the ocean or the ocean itself. We are all beings composed of the same waters, and like fish, we adapt to the changes new waters offer. The Kalunga, as carried of ancestral memory, created the perception of a shared materiality between the dead and the living under the collecting force of one, and Sambi. It seems that when it comes to the idea of death, the Bakongo held doctrine reminiscent of what we find in monotheism, a doctrine concerning the dual nature of the Savior. This doctrine, part of Christology, makes the argument that Jesus Christ continuously possessed a human divine nature and that this dual nature was unified in one will. The monotheistic doctrine was abolished as a heresy by the Third Council of Constantinople in 680, when Pope Honorius suffered the accusation of heresy, claiming that dual nature of Savior did not impair his will towards unification with the source. This again goes back to the early years of the church and the African controversy, where the definition of the nature of Jesus Christ was of utmost importance. At the heart of the matter lies the debate concerning how we can know God, if all, and to what extent creation carries witness to God or is divine in its own right. In any form of doctrine that was reminiscent of pantheism or animism tended to be viewed as an error. For instance, it was pantheistic error that was the final spark of fire which reduced the philosopher monk Giordano Bruno to ashes on the Inquisition's pyre in 1600s. for the Christian missionaries, the Congo belief will be conceived as another form of this erroneous view. This is suggested by using the allegory of the Kalunga as the manifestation of divine oneness and will shared by a dual substance, the dead and the living, which were believed to partake in a sameness separated by an invisible veil. This would be difficult to unite with accepted Christian doctrine in the Renaissance, which said quite the opposite and held a dualist stance concerning the living and the dead, as well as the dual nature of the Savior. Swirling on the mission was conflict between the monotheism of the Bakongo and the binary theology of the Christian. At least this might be how Christianity appeared the Bakongo. Most curious of all to them was the Christian idea of the devil, who was presented as a diabolic enemy of God, whilst being composed of the same superior substance as God and seen as a negative embodiment of the divine. For the Bakongo, Nsambi was the undisputed and all mysterious source of everything. Nsambi had no equal, and thus concepts such as Mpemba, the subterranean world, seems to have been slightly altered by the introduction of the diabolical. The good evil conflict represented in the form of God and devil was to become a sad reality for the Bakongo when the Portuguese arrived with guns and cross sanctioned by the perfect Prince João II, 1455 to 1495. The nickname was given to him due to his perfection in replicating dysfunction was given to him replicating the regal model presented in Machiavelli's work, The Prince. When the Portuguese traveler and navigator Diego Cao discovered the kingdom of the Bakongo in 1482, it was the riches along the Congo River that caused the greatest impression. Upon reporting his extraordinary finding, Cao was commissioned by King João II to continue his journey down the African coast in search of the fabled promised land of Prester John, which was at the time believed to be India or perhaps Ethiopia. This legend is of great importance as it is here we find the impetus for the geographical exploration and discoveries in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. It must have been a remarkable moment. The Portuguese had found the promised land, and the Bakongo at the shores of Loango and Luanda saw ancestors and spirits of death arriving across the Kalunga from the land of death, their white skin testifying to this fact. It was a miraculous moment for the Africans and the Europeans alike. For some, it was seen as a moment of meeting with the departed. For others, a form of reaping, and for others, it was a sign that human journey was at an end and one would reunite with one's ancestors. No matter how they initially perceived the arrival of the Europeans, a diverse range of perspectives on the white people and their faith was about to shape the history of Africa. The Portuguese believed that the Kingdom of Congo was bigger than it actually was. Compared to Iberia, it was of truly amazing dimension. They ended up loosely referring to the area from the south of Nigeria and to the north of Kalahari Desert as Congo and Angola due to linguistic similarities. These generalizations lived on in Brazil, where Congo, Angola, Luanda, and Arunda often are lumped together in reference to the same illusory imperialistic amalgamation of people. There were two main routes for the crossing of the Kalunga, one leading from Kwanza River and to the port of Luanda, and another leading from the Congo, now Zaire, River to hills of Mayombe and the city of Cabinda. These places were to become the melting pot of Congo religious diversities, as they were important stations for the deportation of slaves. I just wanted to give you that little bit on the book. If you guys are interested, it's Palo Mayombe, The Garden of Blood and Bones. Have yourself a great night. And salam alaikum, ma alaikum salam.